he gave up his throne. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. Alpha King Kale Dawnfang, ruler of 7 pack territories, commander of 30,000 wolves, the most feared predator in the known packlands, walked into the enemy's slave market in rusted iron chains. Wrists bound, head down, wearing the rough spun clothes of a common captive. The whip had caught him twice on the march in. He had not made a sound, because the man holding the whip didn't know what he was holding. No one in Vorath's compound knew that the new acquisition, the quiet one with the 2 still eyes, was the king who had every military force in the 7 territories on standby 3 miles east. No one knew that the rusted chains were chosen specifically because rusted iron could be broken. No one knew that he was waiting for the moon. And no one had thought to ask why the Alpha King of the most powerful pack on the continent would go to these lengths. The answer was simple. They took her. And now they were going to learn what happens when a king stops showing mercy. Her name was Lena. He had known it for exactly 4 months, which was how long it had been since the fated bond had snapped into place between them like a key, finding a lock it was made for. That specific, unmistakable recognition that pack law called the soul match, and that Kale had spent 34 years believing was a thing that happened to other people. She was not what the court had expected. Not a noble daughter from an allied pack house. Not an omega of political lineage whose bonding would cement a useful alliance. She was a herbalist, a wandering healer, who had come to the Eastern Territory market with a supply cart and 2 mules and a reputation among the villages she served for being the person you sent for when the pack physician had given up. Kale had met her because she had, with complete composure, walked past the Royal Guard cordon at a border market and pressed a packet of wound herbs into the hand of an injured soldier who was being told to wait his turn by 3 different officials. "He'll lose the hand if you wait," she had said to the officials, in the tone of someone reporting weather rather than threatening anything. "Your protocol or his hand. Choose quickly." He had been watching from 20 feet away. The bond had hit him like a physical force, the soul match, the fated recognition, the thing that felt like every part of you suddenly knowing where north was. He had stood very still for a moment, processing the seismic reorientation of his entire internal landscape. Then he had walked over and introduced himself. She had, to her credit, not fainted, had looked at him with clear hazel eyes and said, "Is the soldier going to be attended to?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Then I can talk to you." 4 months. 4 months of learning each other not through the formal structures of court bonding ceremonies and alliance negotiations, but in the actual way, the difficult and necessary way of 2 people discovering who they were to each other, past every assumption and every expectation. She had not been easy. She had opinions about pack governance that she stated plainly and without apology. She disagreed with him about 4 things in the first week alone, and was right about 3 of them. She did not perform deference to his rank, and was not impressed by his authority in the automatic way that everyone around him was impressed by his authority. He found this after 34 years of everyone finding his authority very impressive, extraordinary. The bond deepened. The way real things deepen through argument and honesty and the specific vulnerability of being known rather than merely seen. They had not yet completed the formal soul bond ceremony. There were protocols, there were court procedures, there were 12 different council lords, with 12 different opinions about the appropriate timeline. And then, 6 days ago, she was gone. The compound of Lord Vorath sat in the dead territory between the eastern pack border and the coastal marshes, a strip of land that belonged to no pack and was governed by no treaty, which was why Vorath had chosen it 20 years ago, when he had first understood that the spaces between laws were the most profitable places to operate. Vorath traded in things that couldn't be traded through official channels: information, leverage, and, increasingly in the last 5 years, omegas. Not common omegas, that market was crowded and brutal and beneath his interests. Vorath specialized in a specific category: unbonded omegas who had been identified as potential fated matches for high-value alphas. The soul match bond, once it had begun to form, created a particular kind of power. Control the omega, and you had leverage over the alpha. The stronger the alpha, the more valuable the leverage. The intelligence had taken Kale's spymaster 3 days to confirm, and 1 more to plan around. The compound has 40 guards, Spymaster Wren had said, spreading the maps on the war table. Reinforced walls. Silver-laced barriers on the inner cell's silver disrupts pack shift, as you know. The guards carry silver-tipped weapons. They're prepared for a pack assault. What are they not prepared for? Kale had said. Wren had looked at him. A single infiltrator. Low value. No threat profile. How long until the monthly slave intake? A pause. Wren was already seeing where this was going, and visibly deciding how much he was willing to argue about it. 4 days, Wren said. Then I have 4 days to look like someone worth buying cheaply, Kale said. My lord, you cannot. She has been in there 6 days, Kale said, very quietly, the particular quiet that, in his voice, meant the conversation was over. The pack assault takes 3 days to position, and will cost 40 lives minimum on the approach through the marshes. The infiltration takes 1 person, 4 days of preparation, and the right moment. And if they recognize you? They won't, he said. People see what they expect to see. No one expects to find the Alpha King in a slave coffle. Wren had not agreed, had made his objections clearly and thoroughly on the record, as a good spymaster should. Then he had helped Kale plan every detail of it. The intake processing was worse than the intelligence had suggested, which Kale noted without surprise because intelligence always underestimated the texture of things. The chains were real. The guards were thorough. The compound's entry procedure involved a search that was designed to find weapons, pack marks, and anything else that would indicate a captive was more valuable than their surface presentation suggested. KL had prepared for this. No weapons. No identifying marks visible. The Dawnfang bloodline mark on his left shoulder blade was covered by a deliberate scar pattern that his spymaster had argued about for 20 minutes. The soul match bond was internal, no external evidence, no scent marker that an untrained guard would recognize. He had made himself, as completely as possible, into nobody. The hardest part was the posture. 34 years of alpha authority had built certain physical habits that were, it turned out, extremely difficult to suppress. The way he moved, the way he stood, the way his eyes tracked a room from the door automatically, mapping threat and exit simultaneously. He had practiced. Had stood in front of Wren for 2 days, letting the spymaster correct him every time the alpha bearing showed through. Smaller, Wren kept saying. You're still claiming the room. You can't claim the room. He made himself smaller. It was one of the more uncomfortable things he had done in 34 years. The compound's inner yard was stone-flagged, ringed by 2 levels of guard walkways, with the cell block on the north side, and the main house Vorath's private quarters, where Wren's intelligence placed the high-value captives behind a reinforced door at the yard's far end. Silver-laced bars on the inner cells. He had felt the silver's presence from 30 feet out, the specific suppression that worked on pack shiftability, the way it pressed down on the alpha nature like a hand pressing down on a fire. Not extinguishing it, but limiting it. He was placed in the general holding pen with 11 other captives. He assessed them without appearing to assess them. Mostly beta, 2 omegas, none of them Lena. The general pen was not where she would be. She was soul matched to the Alpha King, which made her Vorath's most valuable asset and most protected commodity. She would be in the inner sanctum. He had to get there before the full moon. Because of the silver. This was the piece of the plan that Wren had taken the longest to accept, the full moon and what it did to alpha shift in the presence of silver barriers. The silver suppressed pack shift under normal conditions, but full moon phase created a surge in alpha energy that silver could redirect but not fully contain. The barriers wouldn't fail, but they would crack. For a window of perhaps 10 minutes, the suppression would be incomplete. 10 minutes was enough. You need to be in position before the moon reaches zenith, Wren had said. If you're still in the general pen when the window opens, you'll shift in front of 40 guards and the whole compound will know what you are. Then I won't be in the general pen, Kale said. Getting out of the general pen required two things: creating a distraction and finding the guard whose rotation included the inner sanctum. Both required time. He had spent the first 2 days in the pen building the necessary pieces. The distraction was straightforward. The compound's water supply ran through a single cistern in the northeast corner, and the pipe fitting that controlled flow to the guard barracks was accessible from the maintenance crawlspace below the pen's east wall, which he had found on the second night by the simple method of pressing his hand to every stone in the floor until he found one that was loose. The guard with the inner sanctum rotation was a man named Borin Broad, tired-looking, carrying slightly more weight than his armor was fitted for. With the expression of someone who had worked for Vorath long enough to be complicit, but not long enough to have stopped feeling it, Kale had observed him for 2 days, had watched him slip an extra ration to the oldest captive in the pen, quietly, when the other guards weren't looking. Not a good man, but not entirely lost. He would work with what he had. On the third night, the moon began its rise over the compound's eastern wall. Kale lay on his back in the holding pen, with his eyes open, and felt the silver suppression pressing down on him, and waited. The soul match bond was still present, muted by the silver, like hearing music through a wall, but present. He could feel Lena at the far edge of it, somewhere inside the compound's inner sanctum. Alive. The bond would have told him if she wasn't, not in words, not in images, but in the particular way a light going out is felt before it's seen. She was alive. Frightened. Exhausted. The bond carried emotion as well as presence, and he had been reading her states for 3 days from the far edge of the silver's suppression, and cataloging them with the focused attention of someone who had nothing else to do, and everything riding on the information. Frightened, but not broken. Exhausted, but not passive. He knew her. She would not be passive. Lena, he thought, at the bond. I'm here. I'm coming. He didn't know if it reached her through the silver. He thought it probably did not. He sent it anyway. The moon hit zenith at the 3rd hour past midnight. He felt the silver crack before he saw anything, a sudden release of pressure, like the moment a held breath is released. The alpha nature surging upward into the space the silver had been compressing for 3 days. His hands, where the chains crossed his wrists, felt the iron differently, not just weight, constraint. He sat up. The chain connecting his wrists to the wall ring was rusted, deliberately selected. He had confirmed it on his first night by testing the corrosion with his thumbnail. Under normal suppression, he couldn't have broken it. Under 10 minutes of incomplete suppression, with full alpha strength available, he broke it in one controlled pull. No sound. He had practiced this too, the specific motion that let the chain give without the ends swinging against the stone. He was at the east wall in 3 steps. The loose stone. The crawl space below. He moved. The water pipe fitting took 90 seconds to disconnect. The result was immediate, the flow to the guard barracks cut off, the cistern overflow redirecting across the yard flagstones, and within 2 minutes, the night guards on the walkways were getting reports of flooding in the lower barracks and making the decision that Kale had calculated they would make. 2 guards down to assess, 1 maintaining post. The gate rotation disrupted. He came up through the east wall's maintenance access into the inner yard. Borin was at his post by the inner sanctum door, alone, looking at the activity at the barracks with the expression of a man deciding whether this was something he needed to get involved in. Kale came up behind him. 1 hand. Precise pressure. Borin went down quiet and stayed down, not dead, just absent for the next 30 minutes. Kale caught him before he hit the flagstones and set him against the wall with something that might, from a distance, look like a guard taking a rest. The inner sanctum key was on Borin's belt. Kale took it and went through the door. The inner sanctum was a corridor of 6 cells and 1 room. The room at the end, Vorath's interview room, where high-value captives were assessed and held for negotiation, had a different kind of door, heavier. The silver concentration strongest here, pressing back against the alpha nature with a wall of suppression that the moon's window was already beginning to close. He had perhaps 4 minutes. He unlocked the door. She was on the far side of the room. Not chained Vorath wasn't a fool. and a faded Omega in obvious distress was less negotiable than one who appeared comfortable. She had a chair, a table with food she had not touched, a lantern. The specific, considered cruelty of captivity that tries to look like hospitality. She was standing at the wall with her back to the door when he came in, and he understood immediately, with a flood of something that was relief and grief and rage and love in proportions he couldn't separate, that she had been standing because she refused to sit. Small act of defiance, entirely her. She turned at the sound of the door. He watched her face go through 5 things in approximately 2 seconds. Recognition. Shock. A flash of something that was not quite relief. Not yet. Not while he was still in slave chains and rough-spun cloth and she hadn't processed what she was seeing. And then, under all of it, the bond, the soul match pulling taut between them in the way it had been muted and suppressed, and was now, with him in the room, deafeningly present. "Cale," she said. "Not your grace, not my lord." She had never called him either of those things, and he had loved her for it from the beginning. "You came in chains," she said. "They were the right tool for the job," he said. She crossed the room in 4 steps, and her arms went around him before he'd finished the sentence, not softly, not tentatively, but with the specific grip of someone who has been frightened for 6 days and has just found the one thing they needed and intends to confirm it's real. He held her, both arms, the soul match bond flooding back to full presence. Every muted note from the past 3 days suddenly audible: her fear, her exhaustion, the stubborn, furious refusal to despair that had been burning under all of it. He pressed his face into her hair and did not make a sound, and allowed himself, for 30 seconds, to simply be here, in this room, with her, alive. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "Are you?" "The whip caught me twice on the intake march," he said. She pulled back, looked at him. Her healer's eyes did the rapid assessment automatically. His posture, his movement, the specific way the rough cloth lay across his back. "You need those dressed," she said. "Later," he said. "Now," she said. "I have the herbs they gave me. Ironic that they gave me supplies, but it means I have what's needed. Lena." He took her face in both hands carefully, the way you hold something you have spent 3 days in chains to reach. "There is a conversation I have to have first, and you need to not be in this room for it." She read his face. "Vorath," she said. "Yes. He's in the main house." "I know." She looked at him for a moment, the full, clear-eyed assessment that had always seen past the Alpha King to the man beneath, that had been one of the first things he loved about her. And that was as present now as it had been in an Eastern market 4 months ago. "Don't kill him," she said. He met her eyes. "I mean it," she said. "Not because he deserves mercy, because you're better served by him in a cell answering questions than buried in the marsh. And because you don't want to walk back to me with someone's blood on your hands." He was quiet for a moment. "He took you," Cale said. The words were very simple and very controlled, and contained an enormous amount of what he was not going to say in front of her. "I know," she said, "and I want him to answer for it. In court, in front of witnesses, where it costs him everything, and he can't escape into a clean death." He looked at her. "You thought about this." "I had 6 days," she said. "I thought about a great many things." He was quiet for another moment. "If he does anything—" "He won't," she said. "Not with you in the building. Even Vorath isn't that foolish." She reached up and touched his face, the same gesture she had made 100 times in 4 months. The specific tenderness of it unchanged by 6 days of separation and iron chains, and the silver that had pressed on the bond like a stone. "Go, then come back to me." He turned and went. Lord Vorath was in his study. Middle-aged, well-dressed, even at the 3rd hour past midnight, the kind of man who expected his compound to run without disturbance and dressed accordingly, and was only now, at the sound of his guards responding to the flooding in the barracks, beginning to understand that tonight was not going to run according to expectation. He turned when the door opened. He saw the man in rough-spun cloth and broken chains, and took approximately 3 seconds to recalibrate every assumption he had made about the last 4 days. Kale gave him those 3 seconds. It seemed fair. "You," Vorath said, very quietly. "Yes," Kale said. "You were in my intake coffle." "For 3 days," Kale said. "The whip caught me twice on the march in, which I mention not for sympathy, but so that you understand what I was willing to endure to be standing in this room." Vorath's hand moved toward the silver-handled weapon at his belt. "The moon hit zenith 30 minutes ago," Kale said, without changing his tone. "The suppression window is open. I am fully myself. Consider that before you finish that movement." The hand stopped. Vorath was intelligent. This was the thing that had kept him operational for 20 years in the space between laws, the quality that made him dangerous, and that Kyle had spent 3 days studying. He understood situations. He understood, very quickly, what the current situation was. "You came alone," Vorath said. "My forces are 3 miles east," Kale said. "I have a signal that brings them inside 20 minutes. But I came here first." "Why?" "Because I wanted this conversation before witnesses arrive to make it formal," Kyle said. "What you did, you will answer for publicly. The soul bond theft taking a fated mate as leverage against a sitting Alpha King is a capital offense under pack law in all 7 territories. You know this." Vorath's expression did not change, but something in his eyes did the specific recalculation of a man who has been playing a very long game and is updating his odds in real time. "I will answer for it in the way that men who have information always answer," Vorath said carefully. "Negotiation. What I know about the networks that move against you, the council faction that funded this operation, the border lords who provided the route." "I know about the council faction," Kale said. "I've known for 6 weeks. I've been building the case." A pause. "Lord Brennan's group, among others." Kale moved into the room, not toward Vorath, to the chair opposite the desk, which he took without invitation, the Alpha bearing fully present now, filling the room in the way that Wren had spent 2 days training him to suppress, and that he was now deliberately releasing. "You were a tool, Vorath. You operated in their interest. The question of whether you understood that fully or partially will determine how the court treats you." Vorath was quiet. "They told you she was unclaimed," Kale said, "that the bond hadn't fully formed, that she was a useful piece of leverage without being a completed soul match." "Yes," Vorath said slowly. "They lied," Kale said. "The bond was complete, has been for 3 months." He let that sit. "You took a fully bonded, fated mate. Not leverage a provocation designed to push me into an open military response that would have justified the border lords declaring the Eastern Treaty void." The color left Vorath's face. "They used you," Kale said. "Gave you the most valuable Omega in the Packlands as an asset, and didn't tell you she came with a consequence that would end your operation permanently." He let Vorath work through the implications. The man was intelligent enough. It didn't take long. "What do you want?" Vorath said. "Everything," Kale said. "Every name, every route, every arrangement you have with the council faction and the border lords. Documented, witnessed, signed. In exchange for the difference between a capital sentence and a life sentence with the possibility of review after 10 years. You'd honor that." "I'm an Alpha King, not a politician," Kale said. "I say what I mean." A silence that stretched. Vorath looked at the window. At the door. At the man sitting across from him, who had spent 3 days in his compound in chains, taken 2 whip strikes without breaking cover, walked through his inner sanctum on a 10-minute moon window, and was now sitting in his chair offering him a mercy that was the opposite of what his face was capable of showing. "All right," Vorath said. Kale stood. "The guards will arrive within 20 minutes. You'll be processed officially. The documentation begins tomorrow." He moved to the door. "One more thing." Vorath looked up. "The woman," Kale said. "In 6 days. Did anyone?" "No," Vorath said, quickly. "She was a negotiating asset. Damaged assets don't negotiate. She was kept comfortable." Kale looked at him for a moment. "For that," he said, "the 10 years review stands." He went back to Lena. She dressed his wounds in the inner sanctum, sitting across from him on the cold stone floor with her healer's hands doing their precise, careful work. The lantern between them, throwing warm light against the dark walls. He let her work. He had learned in 4 months of knowing someone who was constitutionally incapable of being prevented from doing what she understood to be necessary that letting Lena do what she was trained to do was not weakness. It was sense. "How bad?" he said. "Not as bad as you deserve for coming in without telling me," she said. "I couldn't risk the information reaching anyone who might warn the compound." "I know," she said. "I'm not arguing the logic. I'm telling you how I feel about it." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about it?" "Frightened," she said. "Past tense. Currently angry, which will probably pass into something else by morning." "Grateful?" he offered. She gave him a look. "I was going to say relieved," she said. "Don't push it." He almost smiled. She finished the last of the dressing and sat back, her hands in her lap, the healer's assessment switching off and the person underneath it looking at him directly. "You spent 3 days in chains," she said. 2 whip strikes, in a slave pen." "Yes." "For me." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I am going to need some time to hold the weight of that. It's not a small thing, and I don't want to respond to it in the wrong way by responding too fast." "I know," he said. "Take the time you need." "But," she said, and her voice changed, became the particular voice she had when she was saying something important and wanted it heard correctly. "I knew you were coming." He looked at her. "The bond," she said. "It was muted the silver in the walls, but I could feel the edge of it. 3 days ago, something changed. Something arrived in range." She met his eyes. "I knew it was you. I didn't know how or when, but I knew you were here, and I knew you were working on it." A pause. "That's the only reason I didn't do something drastic myself." "What were you planning?" he said, carefully. "The guard who brought food had a belt knife that he didn't hold correctly," she said. "I had a timing." He stared at her. "I told you," she said. "I wasn't going to be passive. You were going to attempt a solo escape from a silver-reinforced compound with a stolen knife," he said. "I was going to attempt it very competently," she said, "but yes." He looked at the ceiling of the sanctum, then back at her. "We're going to have a conversation," he said, "about coordinating plans." "We're going to have a conversation," she said, "about telling me when you're going into a compound in chains so I'm not standing at a wall for 3 days without information." "That's fair," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." The sound of the Ironmark vanguard reaching the compound gates, the controlled thunder of 30,000 wolves arriving on schedule rolled through the walls. The guards' shouts changed in pitch. The compound's hierarchy was being rearranged rapidly and permanently. Kale listened to it. "We should go." "In a moment," Lena said. She reached out the same gesture, the same warm earth steadiness that had been the first thing he'd loved about her, and took his hand. His wrists still had the marks of the chains. She ran her thumb across them carefully. "You could have sent the army," she said quietly. "Standard assault. 40 lives on the approach," you said. "Yes." "But you came yourself." "Yes." "Why?" she said. "And I want the real answer, not the tactical one." He looked at their joined hands, the marks, the 3 days of nobody, the 2 whip strikes he hadn't made a sound about. "Because," he said, "I have sent armies into situations and managed the outcomes from a distance my entire reign. And the one time the situation was you, I found I couldn't." He met her eyes. "I needed to be the one, not the king. Me." She was quiet for a long moment. "That's the real answer," she said. "Yes." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. The soul match bond between them, no longer suppressed, no longer muted, fully present, the most complete thing he had ever felt, the thing that had reoriented his entire internal landscape 4 months ago and had not stopped feeling like North. "I'm going to marry you," she said, formally, with all the council protocols and the 12 lord opinions and the full ceremony. "I know we've been avoiding the timeline." "We haven't been avoiding it," he said. You've been auditing 3 of the Council's treaty documents first. Someone had to, she said, and I was right about the discrepancy in the Eastern Border Clause. You were, he said. You usually are. She pulled back, met his eyes. After this, though, the ceremony, I want it. So do I, he said. I have wanted it since approximately the 2nd week. You could have said, you were auditing the treaty. She laughed. Briefly, warm, the sound of it doing something to the last cold thing left in the room. All right, she said. Let's go home. He stood, helped her up, held her hand with the particular grip of someone who had spent 3 days in chains to reach it and was not planning to let go quickly. They walked out of the inner sanctum, through the compound that was being systematically dismantled around them by 30,000 wolves who had been waiting very patiently 3 miles east and into the pre-dawn air. The Vanguard captain found them at the gate. Took one look at the Alpha King in slave clothes with chain marks on his wrists, and the Omega herbalist whose hand he was holding with the focus of a man who has confirmed the only thing that mattered and is now prepared to deal with everything else. The captain lowered his head. Not the formal military bow, the other kind. Cale nodded. Lena, beside him, squeezed his hand once the specific communication of someone who had been watching the world's dynamics for a long time and was still occasionally surprised when they moved in the right direction. Next time, she said quietly, as they walked through the gate into the open air, and the horses and the gray beginning of dawn, tell me the plan. Next time, he said, don't get taken. That's not helpful. No, he said, it isn't. I'm sorry. She looked at him sidelong. You're learning. I have a good teacher, he said. The dawn broke over the eastern marshes. The compound of Lord Vorath was being catalogued and processed behind them. The soul-match bond between them hummed at full presence, warm and certain, like a fire that has been burning long enough to know it isn't going out. They rode east, toward home. The most powerful alpha in 7 territories, in rough-spun cloth and chain marks. The herbalist who had been planning her own escape 3 days into captivity. Both of them, going home. He traded his throne for iron chains. Endured the whip in silence. Spent 3 days as nobody. Not because he had to. Because she was worth more than the throne. And he needed her to know that. Not as a king. As a man who had found North, and would not stop walking toward it.